Islam in Spain. Islam enters Spain with the escape of the Prince Abd-ur-Rahman, a grandson of Caliph Hisham ibn Abd al-Malik, escaped to Muslim Iberia, Al-Andalus. By the time Abd al-Rahman reached Spain, the Arabs from North Africa were already entrenched on the Iberian Peninsula and had begun to write one of the most glorious chapters in Islamic history. After their forays into France were blunted by Charles Martel, the Muslims in Spain had begun to focus their whole attention on what they called Al-Andalus, southern Spain, Andalusia, and to build there a civilization far superior to anything Spain had ever known. Reigning with wisdom and justice, they treated Christians and Jews with tolerance, with the result that many embraced Islam. They also improved trade and agriculture, patronized the arts, made valuable contributions to science, and established Cordova as the most sophisticated city in Europe. Reference: Islam in Spain, Dr. Adel El Sayah. Spain pre-Muslim conquest. The Visigoths were rulers with mostly injustice over the land. In the 5th century, the Visigoths conquered Spain and established a kingdom there with Toledo as their capital. Not noted for their skills in administration and statecraft, the Visigoth monarchs invited the Latin Church in 565 to manage the affairs of state. In return, the Church obtained official sanction to propagate its faith. The economic condition of the Spanish peasant improved little under this arrangement because he was now subject to double taxation, one from the despotic monarchs and the other from the local monasteries. The rich lived in opulence, while the farmers suffered abject poverty. The condition of the Jews was even worse. They were precluded from owning land, and prohibited from openly practicing their religion. When they protested, the Church came down hard on them. In 707, when the Visigoth king Viteza slackened in the persecution of the Jews, the clergy promptly deposed him and installed an army officer, Rodriguez, as the new king. The Jews were forced into slave labor and their women condemned to servitude. The contrast between Spain and North Africa at the beginning of the 8th century was as marked as it can be between two geographically adjacent areas. The Muslims had arrived on the scene with a new creed and a new mission, preaching the freedom of man and justice before the law. The openness of the Muslims was not unknown in Spain, and many of the serfs and the Jews had escaped and found a new home in Maghrib al-Aqsa, Morocco. MuslimHistory.com. Muslim rule at the time, in brief. North Africa was seething with vibrant energy. The Berber revolts had been overcome. The Berbers were enlisting in the Muslim armies with the newfound zeal of faith. In Damascus, Walid I had ascended the Umayyad throne. A skillful administrator and shrewd statesman, he had successfully crushed a rebellion in faraway Khorasan and had even outmaneuvered the Chinese emperor into a stalemate in Xinjiang. Walid is known in history as the emir who gathered around himself the most capable generals of any Umayyad. Noteworthy among these generals were Muhammad bin Qasim, the conqueror of Sind and Multan, Qutayba bin Muslim, the conqueror of Xinjiang, Musa bin Nasser, and Tariq bin Ziyad, conquerors of Spain. The Umayyad governor of the Maghrib, Musa bin Nasser, waged a constant struggle with the Visigoths for the control of Maghrib al-Aqsa, the western frontier, today's Morocco. One by one, the Visigoth strongholds on the Mediterranean had been captured. Only Ceuta remained under Visigoth control, and Count Julian, a Visigoth deputy, governed it. It was customary among the Visigoth nobles to send their daughters to the royal palace so they could learn the etiquette of the court. In accordance with this custom, Count Julian sent his daughter Florinda to the court in Toledo. There, the profligate Rodriguez raped her. Julian was outraged and sought to take revenge on Rodriguez for this act of dishonor. Besides, Julian's wife was the daughter of Viteza, whose throne Rodriguez had usurped. At this time, the area around Ceuta was governed by Tariq bin Ziyad, a deputy of Musa bin Nasser. Julian traveled to Kairouan to confer with Musa and ask him to invade Spain and humble Rodriguez. The timing was right. Musa ordered Tariq to cross the straits with a contingent of troops. According to Ibn Khaldun, there were 300 Arab and 10,000 Berber troops in the army of Tariq bin Ziyad. The towering rock near which Tariq landed is called Jabal al-Tariq, the mountain of Tariq, in English Gibraltar, and the straits separating North Africa from Spain are called the Straits of Gibraltar. Tariq was an outstanding soldier, a brilliant general, a man of faith and determination. He extolled his men to march forward in the name of Tawhid, worshipping Allah alone, or perish in the struggle. A skirmish ensued with the local Visigoth ruler, Theodore Meyer, in which the latter was soundly defeated. The year was 711. The main battles for liberation. Rodriguez heard of the invasion and, collecting a force of 80,000, advanced to meet the Muslim force. Tariq called for reinforcements and received an additional contingent of 7,000 cavalrymen under the command of Tarif bin Malik Naqi, after whom Tarifa in Spain is named. The two armies met at the battlefield of Guadalupe. The Muslims were fighting to establish a just political order, whereas the Visigoths were fighting to protect and preserve an oppressive scheme. The Arabs were superior in the art of mobile warfare. They were superb horsemen and had mastered the art of rapid enveloping movements in their advance from the desert across Asia, and the Visigoths were accustomed to fighting in static, fixed positions. There was no contest. Even though the Muslims were outnumbered, the Visigoths were cut to pieces. Rodriguez was slain in battle. The defeated Visigoths retreated towards Toledo, the ancient capital of Spain. Tariq divided his troops into 4 regiments. One regiment advanced towards Cordova and subdued it. A second regiment captured Murcia. A third advanced north towards Saragossa. Tariq himself moved swiftly towards Toledo. The city surrendered without a fight. Visigoth rule in Spain came to an end. Meanwhile, Musa bin Nasser landed in Spain with a fresh contingent of Berber troops. His first advance was towards Seville. The defenders closed the city gates and a long siege ensued. The offensive capability of the Arabs, backed by military engineering and technology, was superior to the defensive capabilities of the Visigoths. Musa had brought his Minjanix machines with him, which threw heavy projectiles at the city ramparts, demolishing them. After a month, the city surrendered. The Umayyad armies now fanned out across the Spanish peninsula. In rapid succession, Saragossa, Barcelona and Portugal fell one after another. The Pyrenees was crossed and Lyons, France was occupied. The year was 712. Muslims established a magnificent civilization and culture based on Islamic principles. In the beginning, the quality of life, science and technology, knowledge of deen and the worldly life increased rapidly to form an enlightened ruling state. The city of Cordova was one of the most advanced cities in the world at the time. The city of Cordova. By the 10th century, Cordova could boast of a population of some 500,000, compared to about 38,000 in Paris. According to the chronicles of the day, the city had 700 mosques, some 60,000 palaces, and 70 libraries, one reportedly housing 500,000 manuscripts and employing a staff of researchers, illuminators, and bookbinders. Cordova also had some 900 public baths, Europe's first street lights and, 5 miles outside the city, the caliphal residence, Madinat al-Zahra. A complex of marble, stucco, ivory, and onyx, Madinat al-Zahra took 40 years to build, cost close to 1/3 of Cordova's revenue, and was, until destroyed in the 11th century, one of the wonders of the age. Its restoration, begun in the early years of this century, is still underway. Alfonso VI's Christian forces retook Toledo. It was the beginning of the period the Christians called the Reconquest, and it underlined a serious problem that marred this refined, graceful, and charming era, the inability of the numerous rulers of Islamic Spain to maintain their unity. This so weakened them that when the various Christian kingdoms began to pose a serious threat, the Muslim rulers in Spain had to ask the Almoravids, a North African Berber dynasty, to come to their aid. The Almoravids came and crushed the Christian uprising, but eventually seized control themselves. In 1147, the Almoravids were in turn defeated by another coalition of Berber tribes, the Almohads. Allah Azza wa Jal orders Muslim people to cooperate with each other, and hold firmly onto the rope of Allah, Quran and Sunnah. Hold on to the rope of Allah, Surah Al-Imran 3, Ayah 103. Allah says in Quran 3-103, and hold firmly to the rope of Allah altogether and do not become divided. And remember the favor of Allah upon you, when you were enemies and He brought your hearts together and you became, by His favor, brothers. And you were on the edge of a pit of the fire, and He saved you from it. Thus does Allah make clear to you His verses that you may be guided. Muslims ruled different regions of Spain for approximately 500 years, from 711 to 1238, and 1492. However, the fact they could not maintain their unity and fight among each other, led the provinces to be broken in rulership, and eventually other Christian rulers took advantage of this situation and attacked the Muslims at different points in time, until the Muslims eventually lost all the provinces in Spain. Although such internal conflict was by no means uncommon, the Christian kingdoms also warred incessantly among themselves. It did divert Muslim strength at a time when the Christians were beginning to negotiate strong alliances, form powerful armies, and launch the campaigns that would later bring an end to Muslim rule. The Muslims did not surrender easily. Al-Andalus was their land too. But bit by bit, they had to retreat, first from northern Spain, then from central Spain. By the 13th century their once extensive domains were reduced to a few scattered kingdoms deep in the mountains of Andalusia, where, for some 200 years longer, they would not only survive but flourish. Also, one major factor which led to the loss of Spain was many Muslims started to focus excessively on materialism, versus focus on the spiritual aspect of deen, and thus their iman faith became weak, and many were not able to be united, as well as to give Islam priority over everything else.
The Alhambra was begun in 1238 by Muhammad ibn al-Ammar who, to buy safety for his people when King Ferdinand of Aragon laid siege to Granada, once rode to Ferdinand's tent and humbly offered to become the king's vassal in return for peace. It became problematic, particularly when Ferdinand called on him to implement the agreement by providing troops to help the Christians against Muslims in the siege of Seville in 1248, as Muslims should not fight or betray any other Muslims as this is a type of kufr. Narrated, Abdullah, the Prophet peace and blessings be upon him, said, abusing a Muslim is fusuk, and evil-doing, and killing him is kufr, disbelief. Sahih Bukhari, Book 2, Belief, Hadith 41. True to his evil pledge, Ibn al-Ammar complied and Seville fell to the Christians. But returning to Granada, where cheering crowds hailed him as a victor, he disclosed his turmoil in that short, sad reply that he inscribed over and over on the walls of the Alhambra, there is no victor but Allah.
Over the years, what started as a fortress slowly evolved under Ibn al-Ammar's successors into a remarkable series of delicately lovely buildings, quiet courtyards, limpid pools, and hidden gardens. Later, after Ibn al-Ammar's death, Granada itself was rebuilt and became, as one Arab visitor wrote, as a silver vase filled with emeralds. Meanwhile, outside Granada, the Christian kings waited. In relentless succession they had retaken Toledo, Cordova, and Seville. Only Granada survived. Then, in 1482, in a trivial quarrel, the Muslim kingdom split into two hostile factions and, simultaneously, two strong Christian rulers, Ferdinand and Isabella, married and merged their kingdoms. As a result, Granada fell 10 years later. On January 2, 1492, the year they sent Columbus to America, Ferdinand and Isabella hoisted the banner of Christian Spain above the Alhambra, and Boabdil, the last Muslim king, rode weeping into exile with the bitter envoy from his aged mother, "Weep like a woman for the city you would not defend like a man." This was a brief history of Al-Andalus, the Muslim Spain, from the beginning of Muslim rule to its end. The moral of the story is that Muslim people should rule by the law of Allah, noble Quran, and take the example of Nabi, peace be upon him, Sunnah, and do not divide amongst themselves against their enemies. Also, we should know that when Muslims shift their focus from deen to material purposes, they will become humiliated in this world. Salam. Hope you benefited from this lecture. Roots Islamic Homeschool, the History Series.